Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for your time today. My name is Cathal Cleary. I'm Director of VMware's Cloud Business Office. And let's start with that name. What is a Cloud Business Office? Well, you probably heard the term Center of Excellence, and sometimes you'll hear a Cloud Business Office called a Cloud Center of Excellence, and there are many other names that people use in the industry today to describe this function. But we've settled on the Cloud Business Office function, and I'm going to go through what it is we do and why we have one of these at VMware and how it helps us to manage our multi-cloud environments. First of all, change is difficult. And really, the move from on-premise data centers to public cloud is a difficult change. And if you think about this change as simply moving your workloads to a different data center, managed by somebody else, run by somebody else, and charged monthly, you're not really going to get the best value out of public cloud. So the reason for the Cloud Business Office is really to drive home the idea that public cloud is fundamentally a different way of doing IT business. It transitions from a very large CapEx intensive upfront cost model where you purchase your infrastructure, you purchase your servers, you build your data centers, and that cost is depreciated over a number of years, but there's not a lot of control over that cost other than to use it well, to the public cloud model where we now have a monthly bill coming from a provider, and that bill varies depending on our usage. So we no longer have that large upfront CapEx cost. We now have a much more OpEx oriented model. So it's really important to focus on that model and focus on the fact that we can impact it up or down, and we can change the return on investment that we get from that cost on a monthly basis. And there are lots of ways we can do to impact that. Think of a recording studio. You've often seen TV programs where you've got an artist in a studio recording a song, and there is a sound engineer and there is a recording desk. And that sound recording desk is full of lights and switches and dials that the recording studio engineer is constantly changing to get the best sound out of the artist that's performing in the studio. Well, the Cloud Business Office is a similar model where you've got the engineers in the Cloud Business Office monitoring the public cloud environment, monitoring the spend, monitoring the usage, and constantly adjusting up or down or giving advice or making changes to the usage of the environment to make sure that you get the best out of the artists that are developing the solutions that are running in the public cloud. Without a Cloud Business Office, well, there's a danger that if you don't take the best advantage of public cloud and you simply transition from an on-premise data center to a public cloud with the same usage model, then it's going to cost you more. Your competitors will make better use of it. It'll cost them less. And they will learn how to use public cloud better. And ultimately, they'll be able to innovate faster because they're taking advantage of the many, many tools that are in the kit bag of public cloud. And the idea here is to get to market faster, to innovate faster, to release faster, so that we can stay ahead of the competition. Finally, I think one of the main reactions to public cloud is managing the invoice and seeing those first 3, 4, 5, 6 invoices come in on a monthly basis. And the typical reaction is, oh, wow, I didn't realize it was going to cost this much, right? So we want the Cloud Business Office to stay ahead of those costs and make sure that we're getting the best value for money from public cloud and that we know what to expect on a monthly basis when that invoice comes in. The Cloud Business Office is not temporary. So some centers of excellence are temporary entities in a company where we're just trying to facilitate change. And once that change happens, we go back to a standard pattern. The Cloud Business Office is permanent. Think again about that recording studio. That guy has to be there all the time, making sure that the sound is the best and that we're getting the best out of the environment. So how did VMware end up in public cloud, and how did we end up using multiple public clouds? Because for the most part, it does cost more to run multiple public clouds because there are multiple environments that you need to take care of, multiple things that you need to think of, multiple different models that vendors use to run different public clouds. How did we arrive in this situation? Well, there's two main situations that brought us here. One is our culture, and that is a culture where we encourage our developers to do their best work in the environment that suits them best within a certain scope. For us, our scope is AWS, GCP, and Azure. They're the main 3 clouds that we give our developers choice in when they're thinking about developing a new environment for VMware. And the thought process is there that, well, if we have a developer who's developing something and used to .NET framework and is used to developing in Windows infrastructure, or maybe a team that has those skills, then they will do their best work and be most agile in Microsoft Azure, versus maybe a more Linux-oriented development environment or developers, where they would get their best potentially out of GCP or Azure. So it's down to the culture and the culture of giving our developers choice. But the second big factor is acquisition. We do regularly acquire companies, sometimes big companies like last year where we acquired Pivotal and Carbon Black, and other times they're small companies. But one way or another, those companies bring with them their culture, they bring with them their tools, and they bring with them their ways of working. And we try to adapt to those ways. It's not a matter of being assimilated into the VMware way. We always take on our acquisitions. We try to learn from their acquisitions. We learn from the people. We embrace the diversity, and we try to help them do their best work in the environment they're used to. So those acquisitions also bring different types of public clouds. So now that we have multiple public clouds, well, how do we help people along the way? Well, if it's a greenfield environment, we need to provide a lot of decision support. Which one do you choose for which opportunity? Similarly, an acquisition or a team may be in one public cloud that is not suiting them best, or they're not getting the best value for it. And we can look to say, okay, well, you might get faster time to value in a different public cloud who has expertise in X space. Therefore, we look at those options as well to see, okay, where is this particular workload best suited? There's a significant cost of entry when we think about public clouds. So I mentioned Azure, GCP, and AWS. And if we were to come up with an acquisition where they were in another public cloud, then the decision as to whether we adopt that public cloud and make it available, or we try and transition them to one of the three we already support, is a key decision, because cost of entry into a new public cloud is significant. There's a lot of learning to do, a lot of understanding. You have to make sure that you can control it in the same way that you can control all other public clouds. So that's a key factor when a developer pushes back and says, I want to go to Alibaba or IBM or some other cloud. Finally, now that we have these three available, we want to make sure that we're enabling our people. So we focus, the key focus of the Cloud Business Office is enablement. Enablement to consume, enablement to get the best out of, enablement to operate and optimize. And speed matters, right? We mentioned time to market and time to value. We want to make sure that our developers get there as quickly as possible. So we're constantly removing any speed bumps to get in their way. So let's, under that enable theme, let's look at the three areas of the Cloud Business Office activities. And these activities, the three areas, inform, operate, and optimize, were coined by our friends in the FinOps Foundation, but we have heavily adjusted some of the things that are within these buckets. So we'll start with inform, and really here we're talking about creating the visibility and making sure people have the information they need in order to best operate their clouds. Second is operate, making sure invoices are paid, managing our vendor relationships, making sure that our people can consume efficiently. And thirdly is optimize, making sure we remove waste. We're managing all the reservations that our vendors give us access to. And we have an eye to production readiness and making sure that the solutions are ready for production. Just a quick note on conventions. You'll notice these two little boxes that we use throughout the presentation on various slides. The one on the left, the green one, indicates a tool that's key to our success in this area. And the one on the right is a person or a role, more likely, sorry, a role, not a person. So this is a role that's key to our success in this particular area. So let's start with inform. So under inform, it's really all about making sure that people have the information that they need in order to operate the public cloud. And we consider these three areas where we talk about creating visibility and creating that visibility activity in public cloud. We believe each of these areas are very important to both how VMware uses public cloud and it stays safe in public cloud. So starting with cost visibility, we ensure questions such as how much does the service cost? How do the current month's costs compare to previous months? And is there a trend? The main questions we're trying to answer here. From here, our service teams can use this data to determine if the costs and trends make sense. If there's a major increase in cost, then we need to find out what caused that major increase. Was it just simply an increase in customer usage, therefore a subsequent increase in revenue? Or is it more down to a release that went wrong, a major bug in a particular release that caused consumption to rise? Or was it simply the deployment of a test environment that got abandoned and didn't clean itself up? Cost visibility is very important because it allows our teams to identify and fix mistakes quickly without having to wait till that end of month bill and without that surprise situation where the bill is larger than you expect it to be. Related to cost visibility is usage visibility. Usage visibility allows you to answer the questions, well, where are my costs coming from? What's causing these costs? And if a service team is surprised by costs, they can analyze their usage and find the answer as to, well, what is driving these cost increases or cost changes. Maybe someone deployed a lot of instances to do a scale test, didn't get cleaned up. That's certainly going to have an impact on cost. Usage visibility is also important because it allows our service teams to understand what is driving the cost and how to impact change to those costs. Now, part of understanding what's driving the cost is making sure that the costs are optimized. AWS, for example, gives us the opportunity to buy reserved instances or savings plans. Azure also gives you the ability to buy reserved instances, and Google Cloud provides you the ability to buy committed use discounts. Basically, these are all mechanisms to allow you to reduce the cost of your continued usage. You commit for a certain term, and during that term, you get a reduced cost for usage of public clouds. Understanding usage is key to understanding how much do I commit for each of those particular mechanisms of getting discount. We'll talk a little bit more about reservations later in the deck. We use Cloud Health to provide both cost and visibility usage. To provide both cost and usage visibility. And we use Cloud Health Secure State in order to make sure that our public cloud environments are safe. In this context, we're talking about being able to quickly identify configurations that jeopardize security or against VMware policy. In some cases, we can automate remediation of insecure configurations. And this is critical to making sure that the guardrails are provided for the users so that the service teams know what to do and know that they're safe within the specific policy guardrails that we've defined. In Secure State, we can define rules and policies, and Secure State automatically monitors those rules and creates alerts when those rules are breached. We can also do automatic remediation. So for example, if an S3 bucket has been made public without approval, Secure State would alert us to that and potentially do an auto remediation. It also allows us to quickly answer questions like, what instances are exposed to the internet that are also exposed to our internal VMware network, potentially creating a hopping point from outside to inside, bypassing the traditional security. So these are the main three areas of visibility, and we give people self-service access to these dashboards, but it's important that we not only give people self-service access, but we also bring it in front of their attention and we give them insights into what this information needs. And this is where the business interlock comes in. So this is the second key activity of the Cloud Business Office. The business interlock is a key meeting where we go and meet the main constituents of the business that is using public cloud. The meeting has a very deliberate agenda, and we provide that agenda ahead of time to all the attendees that are going to come to the meeting, so they know exactly what to expect from the meeting. They know the value that they're going to get out of it, and they can make their decision as to whether or not it's a valuable thing to attend for them. We meet regularly. It's a monthly meeting, and we expect both engineering and finance to come to that meeting. Finance, because they're the ones managing the cost for the particular cost center or business unit. Understanding the cost for them is pretty key in order for them to have a meaningful conversation with their engineers, but also bringing engineering to the table to make sure that they understand the drivers of that cost. They can add the context when we say you had a 20% increase in your EC2 usage on your i3 instance type last month. Engineering can bring context and say, okay, that was a scale test, or that was a particular new release that we made, or a new feature we made, and then we can highlight, well, that change cost X. The business interlock is a great environment to create accountability. So again, that conversation with with our engineers, a new feature based on a new instance type costs an increase in the public cloud bill. Was that higher or lower than expected? And does your return on investment of that new feature stack up? And if it doesn't, then we can review the business and say, okay, how do we change that feature? How do we update that feature to make sure that it comes in under cost and performs the way you expect it to? It's also a great place to hold people accountable to making sure that they're being responsible in the public cloud, making sure that they're cleaning up after waste. And if there are high levels of waste in an account, we can bring that to their attention and make sure that the next time we meet on the following month, that waste has been cleaned up and a change has been impacted. Finally, the business interlock is one of the key areas where the Cloud Business Office can show value to the business in terms of reviewing architectural standards, architectural changes, and proposing changes, or potentially providing solutions to problems that the business already has. So again, it's a great way for the business and the Cloud Business Office to interact, to work together. And part of that working together is making sure that we are building trust in the Cloud Business Office. So the culture of the CBO has to be one of we're here to help, we're open, we're listening, and it's never a case of no, we can't do this. It's more likely a case of yes, we can do this, but there are these situations we need to take care of, or these situations we need to think of. So it's a very open and accepting culture. It's a listening culture, and we're making sure that we're solving problems for people and we're showing value to people. We're not there simply just to control and to put blockers on people. We're there to make sure that the business gets the best value and best return out of public cloud. How can you make sure that people know about the Cloud Business Office? Well, you have to put your marketing hat on. We regularly do blogs to talk about some of the solutions that we have. We have one-on-one conversations. We regularly get questions from the business. We follow up with those questions. We make sure they're answered, and we try to explore other avenues that we can help the business with. And we have executive sponsorship. So our work and the changes or the impacts that we're having on public cloud spend are viewed at an executive level, and then they're sponsored downwards within each of the businesses to make sure the businesses are aware that we're here and that we're here to help them. Making sure that our community is trained is another key activity that we do within the Cloud Business Office. So we put together training plans and training paths for each of the business units. They will tell us what they believe their developers might need or what things they're trying to do in their business in the upcoming period. And then we develop training plans that help them understand how to best use public cloud to deliver on those goals. So under the Inform banner, we looked at making sure that we have visibility into public cloud spend and usage, making sure that we have security and we can react to security situations. We talked a little bit about the main meeting that the Cloud Business Office has with the business interlock, and we talked about building that community. Sorry, folks, I'm having a technical problem with my headset here, but hopefully you can still hear me. So finally, we talked about building community and trust and making sure people understand who the Cloud Business Office is and what they do. Next, let's talk about the operate set of activities. We said that the Cloud Business Office is there to remove barriers and to make sure that people can use public cloud in an efficient and effective way. And the first barrier we got to think of is, well, how do people actually get access to the public cloud in the first place? We call these accounts, but in AWS there is accounts, in GCP they're projects, and in Azure they're subscriptions. But for the most part, we just call them accounts to indicate the same thing. We need an automated way for people to get access to these accounts and to make sure that they can quickly onboard to whatever public cloud they choose. At VMware, we use this micro account approach, meaning that each account is dedicated to a specific purpose, and all the resources within the account belong to a clear owner. A service team would have a production, a stage, and a dev account for each service that they're going to deliver. This makes it really easy to identify who's responsible for the resources in each of those accounts and makes chargeback a little bit easier.
It also makes access management easier as well, because you know that someone has access to a prod environment because they need to run pipelines to deliver to prod, or maybe for the majority of our users in a particular service team, they only have access to a dev environment. So it makes that access control that little bit easier and more fine-grained. It also minimizes the risk of one team impacting on another team. So if you have multiple services that you're delivering from public clouds, each of those services would have multiple accounts, and one service team can't impact the services of another service team. But the micro account approach means we have to create accounts often. So almost on a weekly basis, we're creating new accounts where people are creating either sandboxes or new services. And the opposite is also true. So we're also shutting down and removing accounts. So we have this idea of the account vending machine. And this is a term that AWS coined, but we've changed how it actually works at VMware. And basically, it's a push button environment where people go to our help portal, they say they need a public cloud account, they provide the cost center, they provide some approval, and they get their account immediately. And our philosophy is one of enabling, not control. So we make sure that anybody who requests an account can get an account once they have the approval of their manager. We don't gate the creating of accounts centrally. We don't have the context to determine if any one person should or should not have an account and what that account is for. So we need to make sure that we have the metadata available, like the cost center, we have the approval of the manager. After that, it's automatic. We don't want to be that bottleneck. The account vending machine has to be like any other service we create in that it needs to include access via API. So if a service team is including account creation as part of their deployment pipeline, then they need to be able to integrate account creation into that deployment pipeline as well. It needs to be well supported. It needs to be reliable. We need to have 24/7 coverage in terms of support available, so that if something goes wrong during that process, there is an SRE available to help troubleshoot. As part of that account creation, that initial account, we need to make sure that we have a very solid baseline configuration applied to the account, so that the guardrails are in place and that people stay safe as they're consuming that account. We'll talk about baseline config in a few more slides, but in this slide, we've highlighted what we think are the most useful things, the most useful areas of the Cloud Business Office to focus on when it comes to enabling people to get access to public cloud and making sure they're staying safe in public cloud. But with the micro-account strategy, how do we make sure that we know who's using what and why? This is where metadata is key, dealing with that account sprawl. So every time we create an account, we capture information about that account and we store that information in a central database. We developed a system called CloudGate, which is an internal system at the moment, but CloudGate gives us the ability to store that metadata in a central location so that we not only have metadata about AWS accounts, but we also have metadata about GCP and Azure. And all three, regardless of the differences in the public cloud, all three are stored in a central place in the same way. Now, CloudGate has integration with Cloud Health, so that Cloud Health allows us to slice and dice the information to work out which account is costing the most money, and ultimately where does that flow to in terms of cost centers or in terms of services. So CloudGate has the metadata and it's pushing it to Cloud Health. Again, we're managing all this via API, and we can query via API. So for example, if we have a security incident and that security incident is reported on a particular instance, we can trace which account is that instance associated with and who is the security contact for that account, so that our security response team can very quickly find an owner of an account or an owner of an instance, report back to them, get some information from them, and very quickly take action to remediate that security instance. Account lifecycle is also very important in this micro account strategy. So as we're opening accounts very frequently, we also need to close accounts quite frequently. So for example, if an owner leaves a company, we need to find out, what do we do with that account now? Is there a next of kin that it should be passed on to, or should we simply suspend the account? Users typically move between business units on a relatively regular basis as well. So as users move from business unit to business unit and service to service, how do we make sure that they only have access to the accounts that they should have access to that are within the boundary of that service? So again, those moves, adds, and changes need to be automated. We need to be taking events from a central system like Active Directory. And then, given those events, we take action to either change the user's permission, close the account, or change the account metadata to make sure that we know who the new owner of the account is. Some key tools here. We've got CloudGate that I mentioned, Cloud Health also that we're feeding the metadata into so that we can slice and dice. Secure State is also consuming that metadata so that when Secure State has alerts, we can get irrelevant information about the account. And the key roles here, we've got the SRE who's managing, and also a data scientist who can work on the data, slice and dice utilization, slice and dice consumption, and cost, and make sure that we find where the most consumption is and how we can impact that consumption. In terms of consumption, the baseline configuration is something we mentioned as the guardrails, the safety net for our users of public cloud. So how do we make sure that we get the best out of that baseline configuration and we make sure that people are safe? Well, we believe there's three main areas here. Number one is to make sure that people know what the baseline configuration is. So we got to document those standards, we got to publish those standards and make sure everybody knows about them. We use that metadata or resource tagging to make sure that we make sure that people know what is and is not part of the baseline configuration. And also, if there's any changes to that configuration, we have a change control process where we can work with the business to understand the impacts of the change, both to the cloud environment and to the service, and then make sure that those changes are approved. We want to make sure that the baseline configuration is automatically applied, and more to the point that it's kept up to date. So if for any particular reason somebody has access to change the baseline configuration in an account, and that's an unauthorized configuration, number one, we want to know about it, and number two, we want to make sure that it is rolled back to the way it should be relatively quickly. That configuration changes from time to time, as I mentioned, the change control process. So we also need to make sure that we have an automated way to push out the changes. Remember, because of the micro account strategy, we're dealing with potentially hundreds or thousands of accounts here. So we want to make sure we can push that very, very quickly to all those accounts and make sure the configuration is kept consistent. Access control is key to making sure that your accounts are secure and that the data held in the accounts is secure. And again, because of our micro account strategy, we needed to make sure that we had a central repository for managing access control. And in AWS, access control is managed through the IAM feature of AWS, Identity and Access Management. But the important thing about the micro account strategy is that every account in AWS has its own IAM database. Therefore, we made a clear and conscious decision to try and avoid using that IAM database within every account and instead centralize that access management through SSO, through federation. But we quickly realized that it's not possible to get rid of IAM users completely. So we still have to have service accounts within some of our AWS accounts because some of the deployment methods and some of the tools that are used within those accounts require a user directly on the account in order to operate correctly. So not only do we have to develop a system here that would allow central control of users and central access and would react when users leave the company and accounts are disabled, but also manage those individual IAM accounts that were within AWS also, because we knew we couldn't get rid of them. This system also allows people to manage the permissions for their accounts. So if they're designated as the account admin or the account owner, they can then add other people to that account and they can give those people access to that account as well. Again, not through IAM, but through the central access management system. And lastly, we talked about the personnel changes triggers. So moves, adds, changes to people, whether they're moving to different BUs or leaving VMware, making sure that the access control system can react to that as well, so that accounts are disabled as and when it is needed. So let's talk a little bit about the chargeback and how we charge for public cloud. Well, there's two ways we can think about public cloud charging here and about IT infrastructure and how IT infrastructure is charged in general. And the traditional model is the commodity model. So we purchase infrastructure, we create purchase requests for that infrastructure. That purchase request is approved and goes to a purchase order. That purchase order goes to a vendor. The vendor supplies the equipment. the invoice is sent, it's validated, we check that we got what we said, the vendor said we got, and we approve it and it gets paid. But that model doesn't work very well in public cloud. So if you think about it, if I order 25 keyboards, it's very easy to go count 25 keyboards and say, yes, I got it, the invoice is right, but not so much in public cloud. How do I know that I used 10,000 hours of an i3 instance in AWS EC2? It's difficult. We have that visibility. We can go to Cloud Health. We can verify that way, but it's a very arduous process to have to do that on a month-to-month basis. Looking at the utility model, then, this is more like how we charge for electricity, for example. So we know from month to month, we have a good idea of what our spend is going to be. And as long as the invoice comes in and it's within that spend range, we're good to approve. There's no need to go and individually check every line of the bill, because to be honest, these public cloud bills can be many thousands or millions of lines long. So it's not possible to go check every line. So we have a rough idea of what the monthly charges should be. We regularly review that spend in the business interlock meeting. And once it's within that range, it gets approved. The business interlock meeting still makes sure that consumers are accountable. So the key part about the commodity model is that there's a very well-trusted model for making sure that there's checks and balances in place. We know what it costs, we know why it costs that much, and we were able to verify that we got what the vendor said that we got. Utility model, we need those checks and balances as well. So that's where the business interlock meeting that we talked about earlier comes in. Making sure that the consumers are aware of the cost, and if there are fluctuations in costs, either up or down, we work out why, and we make sure that's a valid change, or that change was caused by us, by an impact of a change in behavior, and not by a billing error on behalf of the vendor. So now that we know how we're going to make sure that our monthly invoice is paid and how we verify the checks and balances for that invoice, how do we pass back the costs to the business? And this is where chargebacks come in. We need to be clear about why are we charging back. And in the public cloud model, for us, we really want to make sure that the user of public cloud is accountable for the spend, and that spend goes against their business. So we want a clear unit cost for each unit of output that we produce from each business area. So without passing that true cost back to the business, we wouldn't get a true reflection of the cost of producing that item. Secondly, we want to make sure we're influencing behavior. Again, this comes back to the accountability model. Unless the business sees the charge and it is reflective of how they've used public cloud, then they're not necessarily directly accountable for those charges. So there are some potential gotchas when thinking about chargeback in public cloud. Number one is indirect costs. For example, you know, if you use 10 hours of an EC2 instance, therefore you will get charged 10 hours for the EC2 instance. But what about the support? What about the network? What about the other indirect costs that are associated with that instance? For example, if that instance pushed a lot of data into S3, there's a network transfer charge for pushing to S3. There's an API charge for pushing to S3. And then there's a storage charge for the data in S3. So the network transfer and the support are what we consider indirect costs. How do we cater for them? Secondly, reservations. We touched on reserved instances earlier. You may get a charge for 10 hours of usage of an instance, but if those 10 hours are covered by a reserved instance, then they're charged at a lower price. But not every instance will get that lower price. So do you just rely on the vendor to allocate those reservations to each instance and take their word for it, or do you actually try and equitably spread those reservations across the board? And at VMware, we do the latter. We want to make sure that the chargeback is a fair chargeback model. We manage reservations centrally, so the Cloud Business Office purchases the reservations on behalf of the business, and then we don't rely on the vendor to tell us where to put those reservations. We actually reverse out the vendor discounts. We recalculate what the effective discount is across the board, and then we spread the effective discount out to all of the users of public cloud so that everybody's getting a fair access to the reservations, and not relying on how the vendor decides those reservations should be spread. In terms of indirect costs, we're charging those indirect costs based on the ratio of the usage. So we take all the indirect costs out of the equation, we work out what the usage has been in terms of direct costs, and then we allocate indirect costs in the same ratio. How do we do our chargeback? Well, we have a couple of key tools here. Number one is cloud health. So you could go directly to the vendor's report. For example, AWS has the cost and usage report, but that's a pretty complex report with many columns and potentially millions of rows. But cloud health allows us to slice and dice the cost and usage report and present it in a more friendly format where we can actually query it using pretty simple queries in a feature called Flex Reports. So that allows us to pull out the data in the format that we need. Then we can use data analytics, Python, or to slice and dice that information to pull out the discounts, to look for the rows that we need to work out what those discounts are, to redistribute those discounts, and then finally to generate a CSV so that we can directly feed that to our general ledger system. Key role here is a finance analyst and data scientist. So our Cloud Business Office has both of those roles to make sure that we can accurately reflect the charges back to the consuming business. Finally, in terms of building our Cloud Business Office, well, as with any new venture, we were fairly short on resources in the early days. The Cloud Business Office started with myself and then eventually started building up in terms of people, but we had to find inventive ways to get more help. And one of the ways we did this is by leveraging the vendor relationships to make sure that any of the programs that vendors made available to us, we took advantage of. So for example, architectural reviews. Well-architected review is a thing that Amazon will do. And we use that to make sure that we could go back to our business and go back to our users and have their solutions reviewed to make sure that they're cloud friendly and that they're optimized for use in cloud. That was just one way that the Cloud Business Office could show value in the early days without hiring many people. So now that we've reviewed both Inform and Operate, let's go on to take a look at how we can optimize our usage of public cloud and what actions the Cloud Business Office can take here. And we've touched on a couple of times in the presentation, we've touched on commitments and reservations, reserved instances, committed usage discounts. So let's just quickly review what they are. And I'm going to focus on Amazon here. So in Amazon, a reserved instance is simply a voucher that you buy from the vendor to consume a certain amount of cloud and a certain amount of service from them. Now I say a voucher because when you buy a reserved instance, you're not reserving capacity, you're not reserving a particular instance type, but you are making a commitment on paper to say, I will use instance type X in region Y for either 1 year or 3 years. And regardless of whether you use it or not, you will pay. So basically you're saying to the vendor, I'm going to use it for 1 year or 3 years, and I'm going to pay you a standard amount throughout that period. Now, at the end of last year, Amazon came up with a second way of purchasing discounts called savings plans. They're much more flexible. So in particular, there's two types of savings plans. There's a compute savings plan and an EC2 instance savings plan. I'm going to talk about the compute savings plan because that's a really flexible way to get discounts. In buying a compute savings plan, you simply say, I'm going to use X dollars worth of that service per hour. And then you pay that amount every hour for the term of the commitment. And again, it's a 1 year or 3 year commitment. So if I say I'm going to use $100 worth of EC2, or sorry, you don't say EC2, you say I'm going to use $100 worth of a service for 3 years, then you'll pay $100 per hour for 3 years. And you'll get somewhere in the region of a 30, 40, 50% discount, sometimes higher for that commitment. Savings plans are relatively easy to manage. Reserved instances, on the other hand, are slightly harder to manage, particularly when it comes to a convertible reserved instance. You're going to get a much higher discount if you go with a 3 year standard reserved instance or a 3 year EC2 compute savings plan, but they're quite inflexible, and it requires you to have a crystal ball almost to work out what am I going to use for the next 3 years. If you go with a convertible reserved instance, then that requires management because it will not automatically follow your usage. So I would recommend anybody who's starting out on this, start out with the compute savings plan, requires lower management and still gets you a decent amount of discount. And then when you want to push your discount higher, start thinking about either standard reserved instances or EC2 savings plans. But you need to know how much do you need. We use Cloud Health to determine inside our cloud environment what that utilization is. And given steady state utilization, I can then work out how much of each of these commitments should I buy. Once you bought them, you need to track and make sure that they're on target to give you the savings you expected. So again, Cloud Health is key here to making sure that we're tracking those savings over time and that we're reporting on the performance. Again, data scientists and financial analysts are key roles here to making sure we get the best out of the commitments. Secondly, under optimization, we need to make sure that we're removing waste. And waste could come in the form of unused storage. It could come in the form of abandoned instances. It could come in the form of instances that haven't been right-sized. So maybe the instance is much too large for the workload that's running on it. We got to establish what that baseline is for waste. So what does idle look like? What does waste look like? What does unused or abandonment look like? And then make sure that we're putting systems in place to detect that and clean that up. Again, this is a key area for the Cloud Business Office to show value to the business. So we can, we have built a system, we call it Slick, and we deploy that system in AWS on Lambda. It's a Lambda-based system. And what Slick does is it has a barrier threshold for waste and for abandonment. It looks across every account for instances that match that barrier or that are below that barrier. And then we can either set it up in a dry run mode where it will simply report that waste, and we can pull that back into a central dashboard so that we have some KPIs to report on, or it can actually go ahead and automatically clean up that waste. And think about, I'm sure you've heard of the Netflix Chaos Monkey, right? Well, think about waste cleanup as a little bit like a Chaos Monkey. If your service teams are uncomfortable with you automatically cleaning up their waste, you got to ask them, well, how resilient is your environment, and can you survive the loss of an instance? Even if our waste cleanup got something wrong, shouldn't your system be resilient to that change? A lot of people will say no, and simply the system has not been designed as a cloud-friendly system. So there's an opportunity to start looking at re-architecture of the system to be more cloud-friendly and be more resilient. But in the meantime, you can simply report on that waste. You don't have to automatically clean it up. Here, again, Cloud Health is great for visibility of waste and for seeing what is right-sized, what's oversized. But we also built the Slick solution that I mentioned. We use the serverless application repository, which is a little bit like an app store in Amazon for serverless. And we use that to deploy those systems to each and every account. The owners of the account, the service teams, can still see what that code is and see what that code is doing. They have full control over that code, which makes them more comfortable in how it works and what it's doing. And ultimately, they get to a stage where they're comfortable in turning on the automatic cleanup. So as well as making sure that we're right-sized, as well as making sure that we're cleaning up waste, we can also look at our cloud solutions to make sure that they are cloud-friendly, that they're elastic, and that they're built for resilience. And this is where our production readiness program comes in. We publish a guide in VMware called Building and Operating Software as a Service, a BOSS guide. And that's where people start from greenfield. When they're thinking of a new service, they go to the BOSS guide, and it's a step-by-step guide as to what they have to do in order to stand up a SaaS service based in public cloud. Now, it could be public or private cloud, and we encourage private cloud first at VMware, but should they choose public cloud for their business, then they can find the area in the BOSS guide that determines the best path to take in order to stand up in public cloud. Once they have it ready to go, we have what's called the production readiness assessment, and that's where we go in and assess the environment against several key factors, and we report back to them against those key factors to say whether they're achieving, maybe they're not close enough and they need to make some changes, or that everything's good and they're ready to go. Now, if the production readiness assessment comes back and has some changes or fixes that they need to make, then we have a cloud advisory service where they can come to, and the cloud advisory service can often go back with a solutions library to say, well, you tried to do X, we actually have a pattern for that. That pattern follows its best practices. Take that pattern and implement it in your software. That's one of the key benefits that, again, the Cloud Business Office can provide, is managing and developing that solutions library to address the common problems that we see in the production readiness assessment. Regularly, once the service has been released, we do a weekly cloud service health review. And this service health review is focused on incidents that have happened in that cloud service over the past week. So we look at the incident, we look at what caused the incident, and we see what changes can we impact on the service to make sure that we avoid that incident in future. And finally, the Pinnacle Summit is a little bit like a mini VMware, VMworld within VMware for our cloud service teams, where we get together on a quarterly basis. We talk about the latest innovations, we bring in guest speakers, and we just help them to be better constituents in public cloud. So we've reviewed the main 3 buckets of activities for the Cloud Business Office. We looked at the inform and the main tasks of providing visibility into usage, visibility into costs, and providing training, making sure that our businesses know best how to use public cloud. The second area, we looked at how can we remove speed bumps and make sure that people are most efficient in using public cloud. How can we make sure that they're accountable? How can we make sure that the costs that they incur in public cloud are fairly passed back to the consumers? We talk about our vendors and how we manage vendor relationships for the benefit of our cloud consumers, and using the programs that the vendors provide to make sure that we can extend the reach of the Cloud Business Office beyond the number of people we have in the CBO. And we also facilitate consumption, making sure that the account vending machine is efficient, that people can get access to accounts when they need to, but also that we're managing the lifecycle of account and we can close accounts or manage the access to the accounts as needed. And finally, under Optimize, we talked about reservations, reserved instances, savings plans, committed use discounts, how we can manage those, how we get the best value out of them, how we can make sure that waste is optimized, waste is removed. Our systems are built and ready for cloud through the architecture reviews and production readiness. So that really summarizes the main activities that we do in the Cloud Business Office at VMware. Key takeaways here, well, we started off with the idea that change is difficult, and changing from a private cloud data center to a public cloud is a fundamental change, and we need to reconsider how we do IT and how we manage costs in IT in order to get the best benefit of public cloud and maximize the return on investment. If you're just starting your public cloud journey today, I would say, well, the best place to start here is to look at reservations, like what usage do you have today and how can you reduce the cost of that usage through reservations. Otherwise, you could think about, well, which public cloud is best for me and which public cloud should I start with? Ultimately, the goal here is for the Cloud Business Office to be able to maximize that return on investment and make sure that your business can move as fast as it possibly can in the public cloud to get the best benefit and stay ahead of the competition. And I'm happy to take questions. I see the first question here. How